Let's do it. Quorum being present, the Committee on Foreign Affairs will come to order. Committee's meeting today for consideration of H.R. 3033, Solidify Iran Sanctions Act of 2023, H.Res. 492, condemning the government of Iran's state-sponsored persecution of the Baha'i minority and its continued violation of the International Covenants on Human Rights. H.Res. 488, calling on the Biden administration to immediately provide Army tactical missile systems, otherwise known as ATACMS, to Ukraine. H.R. 4039, to prohibit the use of funds supporting any activities within Xinjiang Uyghur Autonomous Region of the People's Republic of China. H.R. 4132, to provide for the imposition of sanctions with respect to forced organ harvesting within the People's Republic of China and for other purposes. And H.R. 1150, the John Lewis Civil Rights Fellowship Act of 2023. Chair announces that any requests for recorded votes may be rolled, and he may recess the committee at any point without objection. So ordered. Pursuant to House rules, I request that members have an opportunity to submit views for any committee report that may be produced on any of today's measures. And without objection, so ordered. Pursuant to notice, I now call up measures and their amendments that were circulated in advance, which without objection will be considered en bloc, and each measure is considered as read, and the amendments to each are considered as read and are agreed to. And without objection, after remarks, committee will vote to order the measures favorably, reported en bloc as amended, if amended. And each measure so amended shall be reported as single amendment in the nature of a substitute. I hope everybody understood what I just said. The measures in the en bloc package are H.R. 3033, Solidify Iran Sanctions Act 2023, H.R. 492, condemning the government of Iran's state-sponsored persecution of the Baha'i minority, H.R. 4039, prohibit the use of funds supporting any activities within the Xinjiang Uyghur Autonomous Region of the People's Republic of China with a Moran Amendment number 23 in the nature of a substitute, H.R. 41232, to provide for the imposition of sanctions with respect to forced organ harvesting with the People's Republic of China and for other purposes with a Perry Amendment number 224 in the nature of a substitute, and H.R. 1150, the John Lewis Civil Rights Fellowship Act of 2023. I now recognize myself for a statement on the en bloc. The Iran Sanctions Act of 1996 has been the backbone of U.S. sanctions on Iran. The law is set to sunset in 2026. The Solidify Iran Sanctions Act strikes the sunset provision for this law. Instead of expiring on an arbitrary deadline, sanctions will remain until Iran shows it no longer poses a threat. Last week, I was disturbed the administration was negotiating a secret deal with Iran, including possible payments. It is reckless and dangerous to reward Iran for its escalatory and provocative behavior, such as enriching uranium, attacking Americans in the Middle East, arming the Kremlin, and its violent crackdown on the Iranian people. Important that Congress lead the way in showing our sanctions on Iran will only be lifted if Iran stops its malign behavior. The Solidify Iran Sanctions Act will ensure that our adversaries and those who enable them cannot wait out our sanctions programs. They must change their behavior or face the consequences. On the John Lewis resolution, I want to thank Mr. Meeks for bringing this forward. Very thoughtful. We all were honored to serve with John Lewis. We all know he served in the civil rights movement, was arrested 40 times. He marched with Martin Luther King. He was really walking history in the halls of Congress, and I was honored to be associated with him. And I'll never forget going to his office, having just a private conversation with him about his experiences and what he did with his life. We all had tremendous respect for him. Part of the Freedom Riders, protesting segregated bus terminals in the South, helped organize a march on Washington where Martin Luther King gave the I Have a Dream speech. He was the youngest speaker at that very historical event. He organized the Selma to Montgomery marches and became one of the victims in the Bloody Sunday attacks. Footage of him being beaten by the police was a catalyst for the signing of the Voting Rights Act of 1965. He was recognized as one of the big six leaders of the civil rights movement. He served 18 terms in Congress, and he really reached out to a younger generation. He passed away, as we all saw, in 2020 at the age of 80, but his dream, his life still lives on in the halls of this Congress and in the hearts and minds of us here today. He had numerous awards that I could go on, but just suffice it to say he was a great man and one I had tremendous respect and admiration for. And again, it was an honor to serve with him. This act, this bill, will amend the Mutual Educational and Cultural Exchange Act and establish the John Lewis Civil Rights Fellowship under the Fulbright Educational Exchange Program. It honors his legacy. It promotes greater understanding of nonviolent civil rights movements. It advances U.S. foreign policy priorities by studying and understanding nonviolent civil rights movements. And it's intended to fund international internships, research, and placements for qualified professionals, and it will honor this man, this great man, and the dream that he had that he actually saw fulfilled in his lifetime, although the struggle still continues in some respects. So with that, I now recognize the ranking member, Mr. Meeks, for a statement.
I want to thank you, Chairman McCall, for working collectively on this. I support all of the measures in the en-bloc package. This committee works best, accomplishes the most, and speaks with power when we act and legislate in a bipartisan way. Of course, we'll have our differences, and sometimes those will manifest in a disagreement over certain pieces of legislation, but there is more agreement than disagreement, and we start from the same shared principles of peace, democracy, development, and human rights here in the United States and around the world. These measures reflect these principles and the bipartisan spirit of this committee. Another man who reflected these principles, and a manner few of us can imagine or even aspire to be, was the late, great Congressman John Lewis. July 17th of this year will mark the 3rd anniversary of the passing of our dear colleague, civil rights icon, and a true catalyst for change in this nation. Congressman John Lewis was often referred to as the conscience of this congressional body, a sentiment of which I wholeheartedly agree, and I miss hearing his voice in this body. The bill before us today, introduced by his successor, Representative Nikema Williams, establishes the John Lewis Civil Rights Fellowship under the Fulbright program. I extend my deep appreciation to Representative Williams for her steadfast commitment to upholding the legacy of Mr. Lewis by reintroducing this bill, which also passed the House and the 117th Congress. In reflecting on his legacy, I'm reminded of a quote from his 2017 memoir. He stated, quote, "Freedom is not a state, it's an act. It is the continuous action we all must take, and each generation must do its part to create an even more fair, more just society," unquote. This bill honors that call to action. The John Lewis Civil Rights Fellowship Program presents an opportunity for young scholars to engage in international internships and research related to global civil rights movements and nonviolent means of promoting change. These scholars will promote the teaching of human rights advocacy while also promoting international and intercultural exchange. Although we may not ever live up to the life and legacy of the incomparable Congressman John Lewis, let this fellowship be a reminder to never stop trying. So I hope everyone on this committee joins me in supporting this bill. This markup also includes 2 important bills related to a country that does not embrace freedom or human rights or genuine democracy, and that's Iran. The first of these bills, the Iran Sanctions Act, or ISA, would remove the sunset from this foundational Iranian sanctions legislation. Strong multilateral sanctions drove Iran to the negotiating table to finalize the joint plan of action, which effectively shut off every pathway to an Iranian nuclear weapon before it was unwisely torn down in 2018, leaving us in the dangerous position we are now in. The ISA is the only major Iran sanctions statute that contains a sunset provision, which has been reauthorized numerous times. This legislation goes an additional step further and sends an important message to Iran and promotes our national security. I would also like to thank Representative Shankowski for her resolution in support of the Baha'i people. This resolution has passed the House several times and calls for support of the Baha'i and all others that suffer persecution in Iran. I also support two measures on this markup that concern human rights issues in China. The measure from Representative Moran prohibits the State Department and USAID funding any programs or projects that use materials made using forced labor. In the last Congress, this committee led on human rights and democracy issues in China, and I was proud to chair a hearing on the ongoing genocide in Xinjiang. In April of 2021, we also marked up the Uyghur Forced Labor Prevention Act, perhaps the most significant China human rights legislation in decades. Speaker Pelosi, Chairman McGovern, and I worked in a bipartisan way to get that bill signed into law to prevent goods and products made with forced labor being sold in the United States. By passing this bill, we will once again walk the walk and the talk, and talk the talk on our values. We must act to protect human rights and stand up to end atrocities and human rights abuses. And finally, I support H.R. 4132, which imposes sanctions on persons who participate or facilitate in the forced harvesting of organs. This is an abhorrent practice. The House has already spoken on this issue by passing Mr. Smith's Stop Forced Organ Harvesting Act in March, and I'm happy to again draw attention to this issue and support this bill. So again, Chairman McCall, thank you for working with me on this bipartisan markup, and I'm proud to join with you in urging support of all the measures in the en bloc and on today's markup.
Thank the ranking member. Do any other members seek recognition? Mr. Perry is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I thank you for bringing this markup to us and for the bills in it, for you and the ranking member. I support all the bills, obviously, in the en bloc amendment and the one not in the en bloc amendment. I want to speak particularly to the one that I have offered. Since the early 1990s, the Falun Gong have been targeted by the Chinese Communist Party, and on July 20th, 1999, the CCP detained hundreds of thousands of Falun Gong practitioners and banned the practice of the religion. Since this date, the Chinese Communist Party has continued to escalate its systematic oppression against the Falun Gong practitioners. Multiple studies have shown that the number of organs transplants in China are impossible compared to the number of those on the organ transplant list, and that you can schedule appointments to get certain organs that are currently impossible to know in advance if they're available. I mean, you can just do the math, and everybody knows what's happening here, even though it's hard to prove because the CCP makes sure that China is closed to actual scrutiny. On March 1st of 2020, the independent tribunal into forced harvesting from prisoners of conscience in China found that all the number of organ transplants were not possible. They concluded that, I quote, forced organ harvesting has been committed for years throughout China on a significant scale, and that the Falun Gong practitioners have been one and probably the main source of organ supply, unquote. It is staggering. It is astounding. The report continues. The PRC and its leaders actively incited the persecution, the imprisonment, murder, torture, and humiliation of the Falun Gong practitioners with the sole purpose of eliminating the practice of and belief in the value of the Falun Gong. The CCP has no regard for the individual citizens of China and continues to carry out horrendous practices that never had a place in society whatsoever. This barbaric practice absolutely must stop. It shocks the conscience to think about it, and to know that it is happening as we sit here is unnerving, to say the least. This bill would begin to pave the way to sanctions, to actual punishment, to actual acknowledgement, coupled with action on those individuals involved in this appalling practice. The United States cannot stand by and do nothing. The United States must use its sanctioning authority to curb those who would be involved in such practices. Mr. Chairman, I thank you for the time. Again, I support the en bloc package. I support the entire package, generally speaking. And again, I appreciate the opportunity to have the bill heard and voted on. With that, I yield.
Thank you, Ms. Perry, and I appreciate you bringing that bill forward. It's absolutely just reprehensible that practice is happening as we speak. Chair recognizes Ms. Manning.
Thank you, Chairman McCall and Ranking Member Meeks, for your work on these measures. I am proud to support the en bloc package, including H.R. 3033, the Solidify Iran Sanctions Act, a bipartisan bill I co-sponsored to permanently extend the Iran Sanctions Act of 1996. Mr. Chairman, Iran is the principal source of instability in the region and a threat to our interests around the world. As the leading state sponsor of terrorism, Iran backs terrorist proxies like Hamas and Hezbollah, which are dedicated to Israel's destruction. Iran is arming Russian forces with drones used on the battlefield against Ukraine and is deepening its defense cooperation with Putin. We must continue to counter these efforts and hold Iran accountable for its malign and destructive behavior. But an armed Iran with nuclear weapons would represent an even greater and entirely unacceptable threat. Members of both parties agree that Iran must never be permitted to acquire a nuclear weapon, and the President has made clear that all options are on the table to ensure it will never happen. However, Iran continues to enrich uranium to dangerous levels, bringing it closer than ever to being able to produce a nuclear weapon. Iran has stockpiled uranium at 60% purity, and in one recent instance, the IAEA inspectors even detected the presence of uranium particles enriched up to 84%. Iran's breakout time, once up to a year, could be down to a matter of weeks. And in the meantime, Iran has made significant advancements to its nuclear infrastructure and know-how that are unlikely to be reversed. If Iran continues down this path, it threatens to become a nuclear threshold state. That is why now is the time to maintain pressure on Iran and continue to enforce the strong economic sanctions that we have in place. Extending the Iran Sanctions Act, which authorizes critical sanctions against investment in Iran's petroleum sector, are set to expire in 2026, sends a clear message about Congress's commitment to hold Iran accountable. Going forward, I hope we can implement a comprehensive long-term strategy for dealing with Iran's malign behavior and preventing its nuclear program. In closing, Mr. Chairman, I am proud to support the Solidify Iran Sanctions Act and maintaining pressure on Iran. I encourage all of my colleagues to join me in supporting this bill. Thank you, and I yield back.
Generally yields back. Any other members seek recognition? Mr. Moran is recognized.
Thank you, Chairman McCall, for bringing my bill, H.R. 4039, the No Dollars to Uyghur Forced Labor Act, to committee for consideration as part of this en bloc package. To counter China's Belt and Road Initiative, we need to continue to invest in strategic partnerships and projects overseas. What defeats this purpose is being complicit in the Chinese Communist Party's horrific atrocities against Uyghur Muslims and others. We must not lower ourselves to the level of the CCP in the way that we treat our fellow man. We are simply better than that. And we must defeat the threat of China's malign influence worldwide by sending a message that we will not in any way, shape, or form condone the CCP's detainment and persecution of Uyghurs and other Muslim minorities. The No Dollars to Uyghur Forced Labor Act ensures that no American taxpayer dollars be used to give China a profit for raw materials or goods produced using forced labor in the Xinjiang region of China. For those unaware, many basic goods are being produced in the Xinjiang region today that Products like bricks, nails, cotton, hair products, gloves, and polysilicon, all foundational resources to commerce, and they're doing so on the backs of slave labor. But the U.S. has strengthened our companies and partners globally to build other robust supply chains that are free of slave labor, and we should not subsidize or support entities that base their production and profits in the Xinjiang region. The blatant disregard for human rights and religious freedom for minorities in the People's Republic of China is detestable, and the United States should not be a party to it. More than 1 million people are held hostage by the CCP and placed in re-education centers, modern-day concentration camps, and forced to assimilate by disavowing their own ethnic backgrounds and involuntarily being taught a whitewashed version of Chinese history as described by the CCP. There's witness testimony that some Uyghurs were paid 2 pennies to make a pair of gloves. One witness said she could only make 11 pairs per day. That's 22 cents a day for forced labor. Those detained are unable to leave, unable to see their families, unable to communicate with their loved ones. Victims simply have no hope of leaving that system. They know they will be monitored by the police and oppressive surveillance systems if they try to, and survivors recount that the CCP regularly canceled passports and lured minorities to China only to detain them and use them for forced labor. The CCP also manipulates people by purporting to offer free health checks, only then to use that opportunity to collect their personal identification information such as DNA, fingerprints, and blood samples. If this is the society and culture the CCP is creating, we must stand against every facet of it to ensure that U.S. tax dollars are not directly or indirectly furthering the CCP's brutal and cruel regime. We are fortunate to live in a country where we can practice our faith freely, whether Christian, Muslim, or otherwise, and I wholeheartedly believe in these values and will uphold them to the best of my abilities. We are a country of freedom. We must stand for freedom. We must ensure that our State Department and our entities here as government agents do not engage in business that supports slave or forced labor in the Uyghur, within the Uyghur people and within the Xinjiang province. One more penny to the oppressive PRC government to fund slave labor is a penny too many. That said, I urge support of my bill, H.R. 4039, and support the bills en bloc presented today. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Do any other members seek recognition? There being no further discussion, the committee will proceed to consider the noticed items en bloc. Pursuant to the previous order, the question occurs on the measures en bloc as amended, if amended. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. All those opposed signify by saying no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it, and the measures en bloc are agreed to. I request a recorded vote pursuant to the chair's previous announcement. This vote will be postponed. Pursuant to notice, I now call up HRES 488, calling on the Biden administration to immediately provide Army tactical missile systems, or ATACMS, to Ukraine. The resolution was circulated in advance, and the clerk shall designate the resolution.
HRES 488, calling on the Biden administration to immediately provide Army tactical missile systems to Ukraine. Whereas the Russian
Without objection,
Federation-
first reading is dispensed with. The resolution is considered read and open to amendment at any point. I recognize myself in support of the measure. This resolution urges the administration to send ATACMS to Ukraine. It's bipartisan. ATACMS are critical to Ukraine's success in the counteroffensive. ATACMS have a range of about 190 miles, allowing Ukrainians to strike into Russian-held territory. Last summer, GMLRS rockets launched from HIMARS changed the face of the war. Ukrainians hit Russian logistics hubs, ammunition dumps, and command and control posts behind enemy lines. This crippled Russia's artillery advantage in resisting Ukraine's successful fall counteroffensives in the northeast and south. ATACMS could also be used to strike Iranian-made drones in Crimea. The Biden administration's fear of, quote, escalation surrounding ATACMS is misguided. Ukraine has pledged not to use them to strike Russian territory. The UK has also sent air-launched Storm Shadow missiles to Ukraine, with a similar range as ATACMS. There's no reason to give Ukraine just enough to bleed, but not enough to win. That's been my criticism all along. If we're going to be helping them, you either go all in or you get out. And we're not going all in, and we give them enough to survive, not for victory. So I would urge this administration to put what they need. I urge them. First it was Stingers, then javelins. That's too provocative. And they finally went in. And the HIMARS are too provocative. Now the ATACMS. Cluster munitions should be going in. The Russians are using them. I urge them to test train pilots with F-16s in the event they ever did go forward with F-16s. The G7 put pressure on the president to unleash F-16s from countries like Denmark and others, but we don't have the pilots. The counteroffensive has started. It's unfortunate they don't have everything they need to win and for victory. But I support this resolution because it's the right thing to do. I now recognize, or is there any further discussion on the resolution? Mr. Meeks is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I support H.R. 488 put forward by Rep. King. It's a further statement from this committee regarding bipartisan support for Ukraine. I hope we can stick and keep that bipartisan support, which is really important. As Ukraine continues its counteroffensive to liberate its territory, the United States, along with our partners and allies, must consider all ways that we can help Ukraine win and bring us closer to peace. For Ukrainians living in occupied territories every day brings horror in the face of the Kremlin's genocidal aims. Any Russian push towards victory is keenly watched by other authoritarians in the world, not the least China. So I support the administration working with our allies, joining efforts together, and to prudently send long-range missile capabilities to Ukraine's capable warfighters. And I yield back.
Bill yields back. Any further discussion on the resolution? Mr. Davidson is recognized.
I thank the chairman, and I think the observation that there is bipartisan support and, frankly, support around the United States of America for the people of Ukraine. The problem is we haven't committed to a mission. I've asked Secretary Blinken to define what he thinks the mission is, and the reality is how we allocate resources to support Ukraine is entirely different based on the mission. Now, for the people of Ukraine, they may have a different mission than the United States, and we should recognize that. But there are a whole range of just wars that could be waged in Ukraine. We could say that we support a mission that this war doesn't spread to NATO. We have an obligation as a member of NATO to make sure that we protect NATO. It is supposed to be a defensive alliance, and that would be the most narrow mission that we might pursue in our own self-interest. But that's a different resource set than if we said we support a mission to make sure there are no more Russians in Ukraine. A lot more resources. And far more resources still to say that we support a mission where there are no Russians in Ukraine or Crimea. That takes different resources. And the most aggressive, kind of unlimited war, unrestricted war that it would take to have what Victoria Nuland has said she thinks the mission is or should be, which is regime change in Russia, including war crimes tribunals for Vladimir Putin. We have to recognize that would include occupying part of Russia, toppling their government, and replacing them with a different government. And when you don't define the mission, no one can be held accountable for success. What is actually happening, and I appreciate the chairman for recognizing, by giving him a few resources in an open checkbook, we're not defining what it takes to win. In fact, Senator Warner stated what he thinks the mission is, apparently. He thinks it's great that we're grinding down the Russian army. And we are, except it's coming at the expense not just of the Ukrainian army, as he pointed out, but the entire nation of Ukraine. It's also coming at the expense of our own government and, frankly, other Western governments that are supporting Ukraine without a path to achieve an actual victory, unless the simple goal is to grind down the Army. That's not a just war. It's certainly not being waged justly. And we owe it to the men and women, if we commit to a war, even a proxy war, that we define the mission before we commit to the mission. This is not a just war the way it's being waged, but it could be. And I can't support another dime for a cause where we won't define the outcome. We can't have any more presidents waving banners declaring victory when the world knows that's just not true. And by continuing this without insisting that we define the mission, that's exactly the conditions we're setting. There's another endless war with no defined end state, no exit strategy, tied to no coherent strategy whatsoever. In the meantime, as this war goes on, a long war benefits Russia. A long war means that Ukraine's not part of NATO. Ukraine's not fully integrated into the European Union. While it has united Europe broadly, it's being used to divide it to this day, because the other big celebrator of this war is China. China just this week was in Germany. China's already convinced France to somehow break with Europe and become an ally of China. And our national security interests are represented not just in NATO and the defensive alliance, but in the, as Secretary Blinken refers to it, the rules-based order that came at the end of World War II. The monetary system that we have today that is seeing the dollar diminished and displaced by the bloc that China is organizing. And so when we don't define the mission, when we don't tie it to a coherent strategy, we aren't advancing America's national security interests, we're undermining it. And that's exactly what happened with a misguided, 2-decade-long funding of an endless war with Central Command. No defined end state, no one held accountable for success or celebrated for victory. It's time we learn the lessons of the past and we define the mission. We define what success looks like. We set an achievable end state, and then we match the resources to the mission. So I stay opposed to this bill, and I yield.
Gentleman yields. Any further discussion on the resolution? Mr. Crow is recognized.
Thank you, Chairman, and thank you to Chairman Keene and others for drafting this bill. I support the spirit of this. You'd be hard-pressed, I think, to find someone in Congress who's been as all in as I have been in supporting Ukraine. I believe it's a fight for democracy. I believe it's a fight for freedom. I believe it's a fight for the future of the Ukrainian people, and that the United States also has a vested interest. And in fact, I led, along with Tony Gonzalez, my friend on the other side of the aisle, a bipartisan letter just 2 weeks ago calling for the provision of ATACMS, calling for expedited aid and increased aid. But I am going to be opposing this particular provision, and here's why. I think it's important that we are very careful in our language. I think it's important that when we talk about these issues, that we're very specific about our facts, we're very specific about the language that we're using, and there's two provisions here that give me some heartburn. Number one, the whereas clause that talks about the collective possession of thousands of ATACMS. The ATACMS number is a classified number, right? I know what it is. I know people on this committee know what it is. It might be higher than that. It might be lower than that. But I think stating a number could lead to public confusion about what that number actually is and what is possible to be transferred. So if we're able to strike that number and just talk about the fact that we have these in our inventory, I think that would be a more prudent course of talking about this. Number two, the resolution clause that, quotes, expresses concern that the delay in the provision of this critical weapon system could prolong the war, end quote. There's just no facts that support that that is indeed true, that the provision of any single weapon system could prolong the war. Now, collectively, the aid could prolong or hasten the war or break the stalemate. But I don't like the idea of saying that one system in and of itself could do that, especially in light of the fact that our allies have provided the Storm Shadow, which is actually being used effectively and significantly on the field of battle, prolonging or extending the range of fires. Other allies are also considering providing similar variants of the Storm Shadow or their own version of a long-range rocket system. So to say that a delay in this one system would prolong gives me a little bit of heartburn. So I'm going to vote against this one, but I would love to work with Mr. Keene and others to come up with some language that I might be able to support. Most of this I actually think is tremendous, and I would support and would be happy to do so on the floor if it comes for a floor vote pending resolution of my two concerns. I yield back.
Just want to note to the members that these bills were circulated a week in advance for the sole purpose that members could work out their differences. And I find, and this actually in working with Mr. Perry, which, to get these bills a week in advance gives members time to work out differences. And so I would urge the members to read the bills when they are circulated a week in advance so we can avoid this type of situation. And maybe we can work things out in advance. Any gentleman yields? Any further discussion? Mr. Kane's recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for the support of this resolution. We're now a year and a half into Russia's unprovoked war of aggression. Ukraine recently kicked off its bold, long-awaited counteroffensive to liberate territory from the brutality of Russian occupation. That assault is bolstered by hundreds of tanks and infantry fighting vehicles provided by the United States and our partners and our allies. Unfortunately, there are several weapons that Ukraine has requested that are missing from this counteroffensive because the Biden administration has refused to provide them. One of these weapons is the Army Tactical Missile System, or ATACMS. With a range of almost 200 miles, in Ukrainian hands, these missiles could wreak havoc deep inside Russian-occupied territory by striking command and control outposts, ammunition depots, and other sensitive targets. These strikes would cripple Russia's ability to resist Ukraine's counteroffensive, thus saving Ukrainian lives and enabling the success of Ukraine's assault. However, due to a misguided fear of escalating the war, the Biden administration has refused to provide these weapons to our friends in Ukraine. This is despite the fact that Ukraine has consistently promised not to use ATACMS to strike targets within Russia itself. Having ATACMS in their arsenal would simply enable the Ukrainians to target almost all of their own territory, currently occupied Russians. It would give the Russians few places to hide on sovereign Ukrainian land. Sadly, the pointless delay in providing ATACMS follows a consistent theme throughout the entirety of this conflict. The Biden administration will slow walk the delivery of a major U.S. weapon system out of fear of escalating this conflict, only to later relent and provide that very system to Ukraine. In every instance, the Kremlin has not significantly retaliated, but President Biden's delay has cost countless Ukrainian lives and only dragged this war out longer. At the beginning of the conflict, the United States delayed the transfer of Stingers because of a so-called red line drawn by Putin. Yet there's no wider escalation occurred when we eventually provided those to Ukraine. Later, the administration delayed the transfer of Patriot missiles, batteries, and HIMARS to Ukraine as they eventually provided those with no significant response from the Kremlin. This year, we have again seen this with Western Maine battle tanks and now the training of Ukrainian fighter pilots on Western fighter aircraft. These were provided almost a year after they were first requested from the United States. How many more brave Ukrainians must die before this administration determines that they have earned ATACMS? This administration's hesitancy to provide these missiles to Ukraine is all the more baffling because the United Kingdom recently transferred Storm Shadow missiles to Ukraine, which have a range similar to the ATACMS. Unsurprisingly, this was not met with wider escalation by the Russians outside of Ukraine. While the United States delays, Putin sources new drones and missiles from his partners in Iran, giving him the ability to carry out attacks on civilian targets in Ukraine and sustaining his war effort. I recognize that there are some hesitations among those in this body out of concern that the transfer of ATACMS may lower the U.S. stockpiles and decrease American readiness. But let's look at the facts. The FY 2023 National Defense Authorization Act authorized the purchase of 1,700 ATACMS for the United States. Since Russia launched its full-scale invasion of Ukraine A year and a half ago, the Pentagon has approved the sale of a total of 211 ATACMS missiles to 6 countries, none of whom are currently in a war of national survival. Clearly, there are enough ATACMS to go around, and we can afford to send some to Ukraine. Let's be clear. Ukraine does not need our entire stockpile of ATACMS. A few well-placed missiles in Ukrainian hands could do the job. Additionally, just as we've seen in past systems transfers, the United States has sought out support from allies and partners who have these weapons also transfer some of their stocks. When we lead by example, our allies follow. Also, these missiles would not be transferred via any new appropriations, but by the authority already granted to the President in previous legislation. I'm proud to have introduced this bipartisan resolution with my colleagues, the Chairman of the full committee, Mr. McCall, the Ranking Member of the Europe Subcommittee, Mr. Keating, and Mrs. Liu, Wilson, and Golden. I also want to thank the other members of this committee and chamber, both Republicans and Democrats alike, who have since co-sponsored this resolution. I urge this committee to favorably pass this resolution out of committee and stand with our brave partners in Ukraine. I yield back my time. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Gentleman yields. Any further discussion? Mr. Keating is recognized.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to thank you and the ranking member for holding this important markup today. And I want to speak briefly on 2 measures we're considering in today's markup. The first is House Res 488, a resolution which support U.S. provisions of Army tactical missile systems to Ukraine, also known as ATACMS. For the first 15 months, Ukraine has fought valiantly and courageously in defense of their freedom against illegal Russian aggression. As part of these efforts, the Biden administration, in conjunction with U.S. allies and partners in NATO and around the world, have provided Ukraine with extraordinary levels of military, economic, humanitarian, and fulfilling the vast majority of Ukraine's military requests. Ukraine has asked for ATACMS to strengthen their fighting capabilities and allow them to strike military precise targets deeper inside occupied Ukraine territory. This resolution calls on the administration to provide Ukraine with ATACMS while still maintaining readiness of the U.S. military. And that's an important source of bipartisan agreement, that we do nothing in this effort to compromise our readiness as a country. The expeditious provision of this system will undoubtedly provide the Ukrainian military with deep strike capability they needed to further disrupt Russia's warfighting ability. This was a subject of compromise, the readiness component of this, so we don't compromise our own inventory. It was critical in that regard. We also addressed some of the language, as was brought up, in concerns by my friend and colleague about the issue of whether this would be pivotal or not. In addressing that, we changed the language to more speculative in nature. So it was a product of compromise. I want to thank Chairman Kane for his work on this, and I urge my colleagues to support it. Second, I want to speak on H.R. 1150, the John Lewis Civil Rights Fellowship Act of 2023. This legislation, which passed the House of last Congress, would establish a fellowship within the Fulbright program to promote a greater understanding of the history and tenets of nonviolent civil rights movements. This fellowship would advance U.S. policy priorities globally and honor the legacy of the late Congressman John Lewis, whose 33 years in the House and his lifetime of public service moved our country forward in pursuit of a more perfect union. Again, I want to thank the chairman and the ranking member for holding the markup, as well as the cooperation with Representative Kane. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Any further discussion? Mr. Self is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to emphasize something that Representative Kane mentioned. This it neither authorizes nor appropriates additional funds for these weapon systems. Our citizens are sometimes confused when we send additional equipment and munitions to Ukraine that this Congress has done that. We are not doing that in this bill, and it is not in this bill. As a longtime military planner, I've been advocating for ATACMS, but I also associate myself with Mr. Davidson's comments because I am fundamentally opposed to Congress telling the military how to fight a war. But given the total incompetence of the administration and their intransigence to send the appropriate equipment, if we're going to be in this war, without a mission statement, without an end state stated, then I understand the frustration of my congressional colleagues to do this. But I want to emphasize the fact this neither authorizes nor appropriates additional funds to the administration. Thank you. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Any further discussion? There being no further discussion of the resolution, the committee will move to consideration of amendments. Does any member wish to offer an amendment?
Mr. Chairman,
Perry.
I've got an amendment at the desk.
The clerk shall distribute the amendment. And the clerk shall report the amendment.
Amendment to HRes 488, offered by Mr. Perry of Pennsylvania. Page 3, line 2, strike provide and insert sell. Page 3, line 7, strike transfer and insert sell.
The objection, further reading of the amendments dispensed with. The gentleman from Pennsylvania, Mr. Perry, is recognized for 5 minutes.
I thank the chairman for the opportunity. This is a pretty simple amendment. As you know, our stock and trade up here is the things we say, the things that are written down, and they mean things. The language means something. When our founding documents say provide for the common defense, provide. That means we're going to make sure it happens, and we're going to give, so to speak, the American people whatever it takes to defend them. And so in this circumstance, provide means something as well. The American taxpayer is going to provide Ukraine with the ATACMS. Now, I'm not naive. America is involved in a lot of things where I think it's great when we're on the side of who we believe is right, the side of freedom, the side of liberty, against tyranny, against oppression. There are few people currently serving that can say that they have fought more against the oligarchical Russian regime, once the Soviet Union, even on my own side, for the sake of Ukraine and against Vladimir Putin and against the tyranny of the Russian government, against its people and its neighbors. There are very few people that have had the in-depth discussions with colleagues on my own side of the aisle about the Holodomor, the terror famine that Russia promulgated against the people of Ukraine in the 30s, and how there are ethnic Russians living in Ukraine now. Sure, they're living there. The Ukrainians were murdered systematically, and the Russians moved into their empty houses. Sure, they're there now. There have been few people in this organization that have stated more loudly that Ukraine should be able to enjoy its sovereign borders and should be able to make them whole, including Crimea. And again, I'm not naive. If the United States is going to sell arms to our allies and friends and those who we like to be friends, or make sure that they have them so that liberty prevails, so that freedom prevails, so that America's interests prevail, I'm absolutely all for that. I'm all for that. In this circumstance, I think it is obtuse to disregard the fact that we are $32 trillion in debt, borrowing every single day to pay our own bills, every single day. And then within the last month have agreed essentially to say we're going to add in the next 18 months another $4 trillion in debt imposed on our American citizens who are concerned about the sovereignty of our country as an invasion occurs on our borders, north and south now. While that occurs, we're seemingly more interested in something that's 8,000 miles away. What's happening in Ukraine is important to the world. It's important to Ukraine. It's important to the United States of America. What's also important is the United States of America and our borders and our well-being, and the fact that we need to be refocusing our efforts on the rising Communist Party of China and what they have in store for the United States of America and the free world. Now, we can walk and chew gum at the same time. We can help our friends in Ukraine, and we can help ourselves. We are a force multiplier by the technology and the things we bring to bear in the armament industry. And it's awesome for America, and it's awesome for our allies. It is awesome. And it keeps us safe, and it keeps us peaceful because we have the provisions. We can push the button. We can make the decision at any time. And our adversaries know that. I am concerned. I do have a concern that these will be used to go into Russia. And look, Russia certainly deserves it. They certainly deserve it from Ukraine. They certainly deserve it. That having been said, I don't think the American people signed up for a war with Russia. I don't think they signed up for that, and I think we ought to have a conversation about that. But that all having been said, all we're talking about is whether Ukraine gets the munitions they need to defend themselves and to regain their sovereignty and their freedom and their right to determine their own destiny. I support that, and I think that the EU and their neighbors in the neighborhood, with the most at stake other than Ukraine, should pony up and pay the bill. We'll sell them to them, whatever they need, whatever we can produce so that they can be successful. That's what this amendment does, and I urge adoption and support. And I thank the chairman, and I yield the balance.
Gentleman yields. Any further discussion? Mr. Hill is recognized.
Thank the chairman. Appreciate the opportunity to speak on Mr. Kane's resolution on ATACMS, and I rise in reluctant opposition to my friend from Pennsylvania's amendment. I think it's true the American people did not sign up for war in Ukraine, but the American people have signed up since our nation was born to support freedom and American interests, and we've seen that in president after president for 200 years. And defeating Russia and Ukraine is fundamental to American freedom, and defeating, as the gentleman recognized, the militarization of the South China Sea is in our interest as well for the economic well-being of our families here at home. The Ukrainians are in the midst of their counteroffensive, and we have seen how effective modern artillery methods like our HIMARS can be used in their struggle against Putin's aggression. The House resolution that Mr. Keene has offered is important to get the Biden administration to move more quickly, because that's the challenge here. The administration has struggled with moving more quickly for 15 months, even from the earliest days of Putin's rumored invasion. And then, subsequent to his illegal invasion, the administration has drugged their feet on increasing Ukraine's military capabilities, and I would say our European allies as well have drugged their feet. And yet, every time the United States and the West provide greater capabilities to the Ukrainian military, we see immediate success on the battlefield and retreat by Putin. Now, while I agree with my colleagues that they're concerned that the U.S. is doing too much and our other allied nations are doing too little, I share that view, and I've made that view consistently known for 15 months. As recently as last week, I met with the Treasury Department, arguing they should encourage the allies to do more like President Kishida, who announced $5.5 billion in support for Ukraine. There are many other countries that can do that level of support for buying weapons, for supporting Ukraine's budget, for supporting humanitarian purposes. There are countries that may not want to do military support financially, but they'll support humanitarian efforts, and those are needed. And that's why yesterday I was delighted to read that the European Union, not known for speed and action, had agreed to set aside $55 billion in support for Ukraine over the next few years. We need to get them to do more than that. And this is not reconstruction money, Mr. Chairman. This is money to support the military and budget needs of Ukraine in this fight against Putin. So nothing in the resolution precludes the U.S. from selling Ukraine ATACMS. And I agree with my friend from Pennsylvania that where our military-industrial strength can be used successfully to sell these weapons, whether it's to Taiwan or to Ukraine, we should do it. And they should pay us in hard currency for that. But it is in America's interest, in our citizens' interest, in our economy's interest, to see Ukraine victorious and ejecting Putin from its sovereign United Nations recognized borders. And getting this material to the Ukrainians quickly should be the mission of this government, and the mission of the government in Paris, and the mission of the government in Bonn and in London, because we're foot dragging. We're foot dragging, Mr. Chairman, and that's why I want to take action on this committee to ensure that we take action quickly and quit delaying the defeat of Putin. Let's make this counteroffensive successful. Let's get Putin to the negotiating table, and let's get this war over in Europe. And I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields. Any further discussion? Mr. Meeks, recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I do not support this amendment. The process by which the United States provides Ukraine with military support that it needs is designed to be both efficient and effective. And we also know that the utmost oversight and accountability also goes into this process. By striking the word provide and inserting sell, this calls for a completely different process, one that takes longer and changes the nature of our support. This is not the intention of this bipartisan resolution, in my opinion. The United States and our allies have remained unified in providing critical military support to Ukraine in this vital effort to ensure that Ukraine has the tools and capability it needs to push back Russia and for Ukraine to defend its sovereignty. So we must remain united in our approach. And this is what I think has been key to the administration's approach. Constant conversation with our allies in NATO, the EU, and others, making sure that we are talking to one another and getting them the weapons that they need in unity. This is not just America alone, because we know to fight this evil that has been perpetuated by Russia and Vladimir Putin, it's something that we've got to do collectively for democracy's sake, for sovereignty of territories' sake. And so we've got to do it in a manner that continues us unified but is efficient. And I think that's what this bill, and that's what we are trying to do, because what we do know, that while Ukrainian soldiers are liberating towns and civilians as we speak, Russia is bombing towns and cities and killing civilians as we speak. So I'm proud of the stance this committee has taken since the beginning of this horrific war of aggression, and proudly will continue to support Ukraine in its fight for freedom and justice. And I think it's important because all are looking at us, our allies, but also Vladimir Putin. He's waiting for us to say, we've changed our minds and we're not going to stay together and we're not going to go through this for the long haul. That's what he counted on from the beginning. He counted on us not being unified in the West. He counted on us being different, separated. He thought that he could separate the United States of America from Germany and from France and from the UK and others. He has not succeeded. Now he's up, they can't stay together. And Congress will divide. We can't do that. That's what I like about the bill. It keeps us together and speaks with one voice. And I would hope that we continue to support Ukraine in its fight for freedom and justice. I yield back.
Gentleman yields. Any further discussion? Mr. Heisinger is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I've got a couple of observations, and then through you, Mr. Chairman, to the author of the amendment, I have a question I want to give him an opportunity to respond to. And at first, I want to say, look, no one dismisses the problems on our southern border, at least certainly not on this side of the aisle. This is something that we've discussed and take very, very seriously about what has been going on. Nor do I believe many, certainly, and again, not on this side of the aisle that I've experienced, would deny the debt situation. You know, there are some debt deniers out there. I certainly am not one of those. I believe vast majority of my colleagues are not. And it's true. A lot of aid and money and equipment has been sent to Ukraine. And this committee has taken some pains in making sure that audits have been done. We've had the auditors in front of 3 or 4 of the various agencies in front of this committee not that long ago, because I think we owe it to the American people where their hard-earned tax dollars are going and what are the benefits of that. Frankly, Mr. Chairman, many of us had encouraged, and I know you are in this camp, I certainly was in this camp, we encouraged, cajoled, demanded that this administration send equipment before the invasion, not waiting until the invasion. We wanted to have more equipment there to deter an invasion, and that did not happen. And I'm very concerned, Mr. Chairman, you and I are going to have this conversation of some things that I've been hearing offline. Over this weekend, I was in Europe, in Sweden, who was on the cusp of becoming a member of NATO. And that's a different story, but there was a group of us that were over in Stockholm having meetings with both the Swedes as well as representatives from the European Union, where this was a significant conversation. But some of those reports of potentially U.S. government officials not signing off on outside non-governmental aid going into Ukraine is very concerning. So I say all that to assure that the author of this amendment that he has sympathies, he has allies in his concerns. The question is this the time and place and the spot in which to exercise that? And here's my question to my friend from Pennsylvania, the author of this amendment. Is it your position that no additional money or aid, either military or humanitarian, should be forwarded to the Ukrainian cause at this point? Like, enough has been sent? Or are you having an issue with this particular transfer? And I yield to the gentleman.
I thank the gentleman for the question and for yielding. I think it's important that we consider, I don't mean to say with undue scrutiny, every single transaction or policy procedure that we're envisioning for Ukraine, but this is a lot of money. We're in debt, and I think that it's appropriate and justifiable to say, how much is this costing? Who should be paying the bill? I think that Americans are probably more willing to pay, and I don't want to take up all your time, for humanitarian things, but when it comes to weaponry, I think that's a little sensitive because we have other priorities as well, and we've spent a lot, and it goes through the Pentagon, with all due respect, who can't pass an audit, who just this week talked about billions of dollars that they can't account for in Ukraine itself. Yep. And so with all due respect to the ranking member about the oversight, Americans don't believe it, I don't believe it, and I think it's reasonable to ask them to pay. I know they can't pay, but their neighbors can, and I yield.
Reclaiming my time on that. And I saw the report as well about the accounting error that then discovered billions of dollars in additional money, which leaves nobody with a good feeling. This is within our own government. But what I didn't hear is whether yes or no on that, and I guess I would just ask, if not, why this particular issue. It seems to me that military equipment is fundamental at this point. If yes, that we shouldn't be providing any additional aid or military equipment, that could be more problematic, and it puts many of us in a difficult situation. So reluctantly, I have to oppose the amendment as it's currently written. I've had similar thoughts about making sure that we have accountability and utilizing dollars that have been targeted and put into this already, but I'm not sure that this is the right place. With that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Gentleman yields. Any further discussion? Mr. Keating.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I oppose this amendment. I'm curious why it would even be offered, because we have traditionally been, as this resolution dictates, providing and transferring assets to Ukraine. We've been doing it through a drawdown through the President, and we've done it through the Ukraine Security Assistance Initiative. That's the way we've done our funding for this. And I don't understand why this would deviate from that. But I would like to take issue with the comments that our allies aren't doing enough. As of May 23rd of this year, the EU has put $78 billion in assistance to Ukraine, including financial, military, humanitarian, refugee assistance, or $18 billion directly in military assistance. That's ammunition, air defense, Leopard tanks, fighter jets. And they are the largest military trainers of our personnel over there, too. So don't sit here publicly. I don't think it's productive to the overall effort. Anyone shouldn't. And criticize that kind of cooperation, which is unprecedented. There's over 50 countries now working together with the United States and our allies to help Ukraine against this illegal, criminal war that Russia's conducting. I understand the concerns for our deficit, but where were those concerns? I didn't hear them voiced through any amendments in the process of a 2017 tax, I won't even know what it called, modification, where over 80% of Americans didn't benefit from it at all. And that's over $2 trillion in our deficit now, approaching $3 trillion. So be consistent with the deficit, because certainly a tax change that benefits such a small number of Americans as opposed to a fundamental security need that benefits all America, there's no question which side of the scale that should be on. So I hope this amendment is defeated. I hope we go on and work as we have. We're doing a great job working together. Every month, usually in Germany, the Ukraine Defense Contact Group is getting together, all our allies. And they're looking at assets. They're cooperating together. They are sacrificing their own treasure to help a defense that not only benefits Ukraine, but benefits all of us. It's fundamental. We cannot lose this war. So I hope this amendment's defeated. I hope we move forward in a bipartisan way to continue to support Ukraine. It's in our own self-interest, and I yield back.
Gentleman yields. Any further discussion? Mr. Kane is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I oppose this amendment. My resolution calls for the administration to provide ATACMS to Ukraine immediately to hasten Ukraine's victory. This resolution, as written, does not preclude any means by which to provide these weapons. Biden could sell ATACMS to Ukraine. The President could approve a third-party transfer from allies and partners with ATACMS in their stocks. The President could use the billions of remaining in drawdown authority to transfer some of the thousands of ATACMS in U.S. stocks. Instead, what this resolution does is pressure the administration to finally provide this critical weapon system via any mechanism or mechanisms as soon as possible to hasten Ukraine's victory. Mr. Perry's amendment takes viable options on how to get ATACMS to Ukraine off the table and waters down the pressure on this administration to stop slow-rolling the provision of ATACMS, which is prolonging this costly war. Mr. Perry's amendment also calls on U.S. allies and partners to sell rather than transfer similar systems to Ukraine. However, we have been pushing our European allies to do more to share the burden in supporting Ukraine. The Brits have stepped up and provided long-range Storm Shadow missiles, which have a similar range to ATACMS. The French are reportedly preparing to transfer Scalp long-range missiles to Ukraine as well. In the name of burden sharing, I think it's critical that our European allies continue sending weapons to Ukraine from their stocks, as the U.S. has done, and Congress should call on them to do so. Finally, the draft of the FY 2024 National Defense Authorization Act, which our HFAC colleagues are marking up today, authorizes the Ukraine Security Assistance Initiative to direct not less than $80 million for the procurement of ATACMS for the Ukrainian armed forces. It is necessary and essential that our two of our three committees in this body responsible for the American national security are in unison on this matter. I yield back.
Gentleman yields. Any further discussion? Mr. Liu is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I rise to oppose this amendment. There are three reasons why I chose to co-lead this excellent resolution by Representative Kane. First, I'm a strong believer in peace and diplomacy. I believe the fastest way to achieve peace is to convince Vladimir Putin that he cannot win militarily in Ukraine. Until he comes to that conclusion, he will continue the war in Ukraine. Number two, I previously served on active duty in the United States military for a little over 4 years. I then served 21 years in the reserves. I studied military history. It's very clear to me that the side that wins in a war is a side that chooses to win. This is a war happening in Ukraine, and I'm very pleased that we're now starting to see NATO countries making the decision to support Ukraine so that they can win. It is not enough simply to support the Ukrainians so that they don't lose, because the problem is there's a big risk that if we just do that, we will lose, because the American public and our NATO allies are not going to be able to continue to sustain funding Ukraine year after year after year after year. The American public simply will not stand for that. So we've got to make the decision to win. I'm pleased to see that the Biden administration has now changed its stance on F-16s and allowed training to go forward. Having served in the Air Force on active duty, I believe, frankly, it is insane to look at modern warfare and not say that air power is critical. Air power is critical. I'm glad that NATO countries are finally coming around to that view. And then the third reason that I support this resolution is because we're going to end up spending more money if Russia conquers Ukraine. Because at that point, we're going to spend a lot more money than funding every NATO country trying to make sure that Russia doesn't attack them next. And so for those reasons, I believe we need to give the Ukrainians the weapons they need to win. It frankly doesn't make any sense why we would give them HIMARS, and just because this system goes a little bit further, somehow we say, oh, there's some red line here that we can't give this system to them. Of course we can, and we should, and we need to. With that, I yield back.
Gentleman yields. Any further discussion? Mr. Crow is recognized.
Thank you, Chairman. I oppose this amendment for the reason that's been well articulated by my friends on both sides of the aisle. But I did want to take a moment to speak on the larger resolution for just a moment. My office did express our concerns in advance of the hearing, and I don't know what happened. I don't know why we're having the debate here. I won't speak to that. But I do believe that Chairman Keene has offered this in good faith. I agree with the vast majority of it. I think we're 90% of the way there. I've been given a guarantee that you all will work with me to address some of my concerns and some of the wording, and I certainly believe that to be true. So I'm going to change my vote. I will support it with the understanding that we're going to negotiate, and we'll hopefully get where we need to be before a floor vote as well. So thank you. Yield back.
Gentleman yields. Any other members seek recognition? There being no further discussion, the question now occurs on the amendment offered by Mr. Perry, number 225. All those in favor signify by saying aye. All those opposed signify by saying no. No. In the opinion of the chair, the noes have it, and the amendment is not agreed to. Are there any further amendments? There being no further amendments, I move that the committee report H-Res 488 to the House with a favorable recommendation. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. All those opposed signify by saying no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it, and the motion is agreed to. Without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid on the table. Staff is authorized to make any technical and conforming changes. Why can't we vote now?
Because we have to vote on the en bloc, and we don't have a lot of members here. If you want to, we can give people like a 10-minute warning to get back, but we were thinking do it before.
The committee will recess, will reconvene at 1 p.m. for votes so that we have all members present to participate in that vote. And that is 1 p.m. just before the votes are called at, I believe, about 1:15. Now, with that, the committee is in recess. At the Hawking Dove. All right, here we go. The quorum being present, the committee will come to order. Hey, I'm bold. Okay. Committee postponed further proceedings on reporting the measure en bloc as amended, if amended, on which the ayes prevailed by voice vote. Question now occurs on reporting the measure en bloc as amended, if amended, to the House with a favorable recommendation. The clerk will call the roll.
Representative Smith? Smith? Representative Wilson? Wilson? Representative Perry? Perry? Representative Issa? Issa? Representative Wagner? Aye. Wagner votes aye. Representative Mast? Aye. Mast votes aye. Representative Buck? Buck? Representative Burchett? Aye. Burchett votes aye. Representative Green? Aye. Green votes aye. Representative Barr? Barr votes aye. Representative Ronnie Jackson? Jackson? Representative Young Kim? Aye. Kim votes aye. Representative Salazar? Salazar? Representative Huizenga? Huizenga? Representative Rodawagan? Rodawagan votes aye. Representative Hill? Hill? Representative Davidson? Davidson votes aye. Representative Bayard? Bayard? Representative Waltz? Waltz? Representative Kane? Kane? Representative Lawler? Lawler votes aye. Representative Mills? Aye. Mills votes aye. Representative McCormick? Aye. McCormick votes aye. Representative Moran? Aye. Moran votes aye. Representative James? James? Representative Self? Aye. Self votes aye. Ranking Member Meeks? Aye. Meeks votes aye. Representative Sherman? Sherman? Representative Connolly?
Aye.
Connolly votes aye. Representative Keating? Aye. Keating votes aye. Representative Barra? Barra votes aye. Representative Castro? Castro? Representative Titus? Titus votes aye. Representative Liu? Liu votes aye. Representative Wild? Aye. Wild votes aye. Representative Phillips?
Aye.
Phillips votes aye. Representative Allred? Allred votes aye. Representative Andy Kim? Kim votes aye. Representative Jacobs? Jacobs? Representative Manning?
Aye.
Manning votes aye. Representative Sherfilis McCormick?
Aye.
Sherfilis McCormick votes aye. Representative Stanton? Aye. Stanton votes aye. Representative Dean? Dean votes aye. Representative Moskowitz? Moskowitz. Representative Jonathan Jackson?
Aye.
Jackson votes aye. Representative Kamlager Dove? Kamlager Dove. Representative Costa? Costa. Representative Crow? Aye. Crow votes aye. Representative Schneider? Aye. Schneider votes aye.
How am I recorded? Chairman votes aye.
Mr. Chairman, how am I recorded? Congressman Kane?
Mr. Kane?
Vote aye.
Kane votes aye.
Huizenga, unrecorded.
Mr. Huizenga?
Aye.
Huizenga votes aye.
Have all members voted? Does any member wish to record or change their vote? The clerk will report the tally.
On this vote, the ayes are 33 and the noes are 0.
The ayes have it, and the motion is agreed to. Without objection, the motion reconsiders laid on the table. Staff is authorized to make any technical and conforming changes. Pursuant to the previous order of the committee, each measure is ordered favorably reported as amended if amended, and each measure so amended shall be reported as a single amendment in the nature of a substitute. This concludes consideration of the measures noticed by the committee for today, and I want to thank all the members. There being no further business to transact, the committee stands adjourned.